It's April, and April, of course, is the month of Easter, and some other things, but they haven't quite nailed the marketing yet. So, what better time than now to talk about a film with a rabbit?
He's a polka.
That's right, it's 1950s Harvey, starring Jimmy Stewart. We keep it timely on this channel. Here's a 72-year-old film, which itself was an adaptation of a 78-year-old stage play. The lead actor's been dead for 25 years, so let's never accuse me of not striking while the iron is ice cold. So we've got Jimmy Stewart, who you probably know best from everyone's favorite public domain Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life, but he's done so much more. His peculiar mannerisms and intonation echo through the decades in the form of bad impersonations, even to this day. He plays the protagonist, but not the titular character, Elwood P. Dowd. He offers everyone his business card upon meeting them and tries to introduce them to his friend Harvey.
Let me give you one of my cards.
The film opens with him going out for the day, and they boil down his character into two defining traits in one scene. He opens the gate and says, "After you," seemingly to nobody, and then he has a brief talk with the mailman in which the mailman says to him that it's a beautiful day, and Elwood responds that every day is a beautiful day.
Oh, every day is a beautiful day.
That's the core of Elwood P. Dowd. Boundless optimism, taking life as it presents itself, and always outgoing. His sister and niece are in the house as well. They're quick to establish themselves. They're dressed in house coats, which they quickly doff, revealing the fancy dresses they've got on underneath. They then spend the next 10 minutes lamenting that they have to live with Elwood and how they need to sneak around behind his back to have friends over. They've been planning a party, they've got guests coming over, and they just cannot have Elwood in the house when that happens. Normally I'd say this is a bit of an exaggeration, but damn if the caterer just didn't run out on them after he introduced her to Harvey. He's not even there, and he's apparently making their time tough. So much so that his sister calls her friend, Judge Gaffney, to send someone to keep Elwood from coming home early. It is not successful. Elwood just wants to hang out at his favorite bar with his friend Harvey and schmooze with the locals. But, as we've established, that's the core of his character. Now, so long story short, Elwood's sister and niece are tired of his eccentricities making them social pariahs, so they concoct a scheme to have him committed to a local sanitarium for psychiatric care. And with Elwood frankly speaking to an invisible 6-foot-tall rabbit,
He's a polka.
that shouldn't be a hard sell, right? Due to a mix-up, his sister ends up getting committed instead. The hospital staff understandably think that she's the one there for treatment, because as strange as Elwood is, his sister is just as high-strung and eccentric. This might be something that runs in the family. The doctors let Elwood out of the room they've put him in, and they have a talk with him to try to smooth things over so that he doesn't sue the hospital. It's not until they find a hat with 2 holes for ears that they finally realize they've made a mix-up. The doctor and the rest of the hospital staff run out to try to track down Elwood, and eventually the lead doctor, Dr. Chumley, finds Elwood at the bar he usually haunts. The doctor has a conversation with Harvey, and he winds up going off with the rabbit. When the other sanitarium staff come out to find Elwood at the bar, the orderly threatens him with violence because he thinks Elwood's done something with Dr. Chumley. Elwood tells him that Chumley and Harvey went off to another bar to have a chat, and the orderly runs off to try to find them, leaving Elwood with the other doctor and the nurse. Dr. Chumley, looking quite disheveled and distressed, actually winds up coming back to the hospital. He tells the gate guard that he's being followed, and it turns out that who he's being pursued by is none other than Harvey. He has a one-on-one conversation with Elwood later on about Harvey in Akron, Ohio, and Dr. Chumley confides in Elwood that his sister is behind the plot to have him committed. No sooner than they exchange that information than the sister, the niece, and the judge arrive in a taxi. They pressure Elwood into taking a medication to make Harvey go away, and after a short conversation, Elwood agrees to take the shot. But while he's in there to get the shot, a conversation with the cab driver that brought them all out there makes his sister change her mind about him getting the treatment. She pounds on the door telling them to stop it, and they all end up going off together. So Harvey, to me at least, feels vaguely like the inspiration for Drop Dead Fred decades later. An adult with an imaginary friend, threatened by the family, wanting to deal with the problem with medication. It's like if Sesame Street tried to make Snuffleupagus go away with Effexor. The film does go out of its way to make us suspect that Harvey might not just be a figment of Elwood's imagination. The fact that the doctor finds a hat with a hole for ears, the fact that Vida can't find her change purse to pay the cab fare at the end, the fact that Dr. Chumley winds up seeing Harvey too. Hell, the way people run off when introduced to Harvey could well be them reacting to seeing a 6'3.5" rabbit.
He's a polka.
And not one of the people who were introduced to Harvey say, "That man introduced me to thin air." The position of the audience is one that doesn't see Harvey, and those people clearly exist in the story, but it's also very possible that there are people who are reacting to seeing him. It could be it takes a special kind of person, someone with a type of need to see him. See, Harvey is never actually... Elwood makes it clear that Harvey isn't a rabbit actually. He's a puka, which is a type of Irish fairy type thing. They're mischievous and they're attracted to people who, I guess, need their input, and that's why Harvey has come to Elwood. Dr. Chumley later on expresses a need to Elwood in his office. That the scene is basically set up like a reverse therapy session, with Dr. Chumley laying on the sofa and Elwood listening from the chair. He confides in him that he wants someone to hold his hand in Akron, Ohio of all places, while they drink a cold beer for 2 weeks. He asks Elwood if Harvey could do that for him. He thinks these needs can only be met by Harvey, so that means he can see him. Elwood says something I think that also indicates why he at one point needed Harvey as well. He talks about something his mother told him when he was young. She told him, "In this world you must be oh so smart, or oh so pleasant." And that for years he was smart, and that he'd recommend being pleasant instead. To me, this signals that Elwood was a very unhappy person before Harvey came along, and that's why he needed him. The fact that he was trying to be clever before, and the way he is now, where he's just so nice to everybody. And he seems genuinely happy. His life must have improved so much, just from that change of outlook. I'm going to address the elephant in the room here. Harvey obviously deals with themes of mental illness and institutionalization. His family wants him locked away because they're embarrassed by him, and the institution they send him to proves itself heavy-handed to say the least. Between the orderly jerking Elwood into the elevator and the way he manhandled Vida, this is obviously a place where the first instinct is a form of violence. This is recurring with the character of Wilson, the orderly, because in almost every scene with him interacting with Elwood, he's threatening him with violence, and only the doctor and the nurse are there to stop him. It happens in the bar, it happens in Dr. Chumley's office. He's clearly traumatized his sister Vida, and he just goes about his business around her without thinking about that. This is an issue with mental health institutions even today, of course, but I can only imagine what it would have been like in the 50s, when the entire field of psychiatry had barely gotten past Jung, and was in the throes of frontal lobotomy and shock therapy being used as popular treatment. On that last part, I think it's worth examining the words of the cabbie at the end. He wants his money now, because he knows when they're done with Elwood, he's not going to be cheerful or generous with his money. He'll be a perfectly normal, grumpy human being.
And you know what stinkers they are.
It's not unreasonable to think that, given the prevalence at the time, that this is a thinly veiled reference to the lobotomy. The procedure involved cutting into the skull and into the brain, and look, it was intentionally causing brain damage and frequently resulted in the person getting the procedure being irrevocably changed. It was a horrible procedure, and it's frankly a black mark on the entire medical field. The play this was based on was written in the early 1940s, landing on Broadway in '44. This was the heyday of the lobotomy. Possibly the best-known recipient of the procedure was lobotomized in the period when this was being written, Rosemary Kennedy in 1941, to treat what was most likely depression and seizures. She lost the ability to speak for the rest of her life, and required permanent care. In the modern era, the end of Harvey could easily be construed as being anti-treatment, which is not a great message to be putting out there. But I think we need to examine the film in the context of when it came out, 1950, and the state of the mental health industry was vastly different then. Harvey is an important film and a fine example of Jimmy Stewart's work. However, it does deal with some uncomfortable material, so watch at your own peril. I'm giving this movie a rating of 3.5 chocolate eggs out of 5. The acting is a little wooden in places. That's largely owing to the prevalent style at the time. People were still getting used to talking in films in the first place. But if you can get over that, I'd say give it a watch. It's fun, it's interesting, and Elwood is an incorrigible and adorable character. So that's my review for April. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in. I have once again been your host, Joe, and I will see you next week with more Tunic, I think.